Well, hello, gorgeous people. Today I want to chat with you about all of the books that I read in April. It was a pretty great reading month. I'm going to be going from least likely to recommend to you to most likely to recommend to you. I will say that I feel like I was pretty lucky this month because even the book that I would least likely to recommend to you was pretty good. It just didn't blow me away. I will tell you what it is. This is The Mitford Affair by Marie Benedict. This book follows the Mitford sisters, who I had heard about, but really knew nothing about. I only knew that one of them was a writer, Nancy Mitford, and then that some of them had been tied to the Nazis during World War II and the lead up to World War II. I just didn't know how in depth that went. And that is explored in this book. Here we follow Nancy Mitford. We also follow Diana and Unity as well. Both Diana and Unity end up being quite closely tied to the Nazis. Very disturbing. Nancy essentially is put into a very awkward situation where she is very much against fascism, against the Nazis, and is trying to stand up for her country. But that gets incredibly awkward when it's putting you between your family. It's a difficult thing to navigate, but she does navigate that in this book. I liked this book. I found it slow going, even though the subject is fascinating. I found the relationships between the sisters extremely annoying. It felt like they were sisters almost in name only, and they kind of showed up for one another but never really showed themselves to each other. Maybe it was just a really screwed up family. That's possible. Just not relatable in any way, I will say. It was good, and I really like Marie Benedict, and I feel like every time I read one of her books, I get to know a piece of history in a very delightful way because she writes about people from history. So I really like that. I guess I just had wished for more from this. The ending also was just like, boop, the end. And I was like, I literally went back and forth. I read the last little bit again because I was like, wait, was that the end? The ending was not thought out, I will say, but interesting subject matter. The next book is Kim Jiyoung, born 1982. Now, I heard about this book because I looked up a movement that is going on in Korea called the 4B movement, which is fascinating. Essentially, there are many, many women in Korea who are just saying, I'm done with this BS. They are no longer marrying men. They are not having sex with men. They are not having babies. They're just saying, I'm out. And the reason for that is because of the essentially misogynistic world and communities that they're living in. And it appears that the whole movement began with this book being published. It follows the life of a woman being recounted to her therapist. So our narrator talks to her therapist about everything that has happened to her in her entire life, from being a little child where her younger brother is born, and absolutely everything is focused on the younger brother, and she's not as cared for, not as encouraged because she's a girl. And it goes all the way to her having children and feeling like she has no real identity of her own. She's not encouraged to go back to work. She wants to go back to work, but she actually can't. And just the disparity between women in the workforce and men in the workforce, and how women are told to be quiet and are essentially sexually harassed and assaulted all the time, from teachers to bosses to people on the subway, like constantly. It was extremely disturbing. What I found confusing about this book was I didn't know if it was trying to be fiction or if it was trying to be nonfiction. At the end of every chapter, there's this like nonfiction area where it talks about the misogyny, the patriarchy in Korea, and gives facts and all of that. And I found it fascinating, but I didn't know what it was trying to do. And I feel like it should have had like a separate section at the back where it was like, here's the content to back up this experience that this woman is having, or an asterisk or something along those lines. So this may have been no fault of the author. Maybe this is a publisher complaint, but as I was reading it, I found it really confusing. And I actually went and I was like, is this actually fiction? What am I doing with this? So that's the only real reason that like I'd recommend it, but I just feel like it needs some work in that way. Moving on to the Golden Enclaves. I finished the Scholomance series. There was only 3 in the series, and I really enjoyed this whole series. It follows a girl who goes to this school. It is school, but there are no teachers there. There are things that jump out at you at the school that are trying to kill you, and it really is a real feat if you can graduate alive. Many, many people do not. And it follows this young woman / witch, young girl, who's trying to sort out her spot in it because she is magically inclined. She can do stuff, but it takes a lot of effort to do the littlest of things that other classmates of hers could do easily. But the difference between them and her is that she's actually incredibly powerful. She could bring them all down in a split second, but she has a hard time doing things like mopping her floor of her little dorm room. So I really loved the first book. The second book I felt about. The third book I felt like could have gone into 4 books because they packed so much into 4. It is essentially at the point where she does graduate and you see her on the outside and in the outside world, and I really did enjoy that. I really liked this character a lot, and it was great to see her like own her power. Yeah, I'm sad that it's over, and it makes me feel like maybe I can do fantasy. It's just very limited as to what kind of fantasy I can do. If you guys have any recommendations for someone who liked the Scholomance series and is open to trying something else that's fantasy related, that like, if you liked this, you should read that. If you have any recommendations, I'd love to know. I also read the 14th book in the MAISIE DOBBS series. This is called To Die But Once. In this book, we are in the thick of World War II. People have sent their children to the countryside because they believe the bombs are going to start dropping on London. In this particular case that MAISIE takes on, she has a very suspicious death of this young man who was able to get out of fighting because he's hired by the government to go and paint the government buildings with like a was it called fire retardant? I don't know. I think it's called that, where, you know, it's unlikely to catch a blaze. So he's doing that, and then he subsequently dies, and she's trying to figure out what happened to him. I really liked this book. I feel like I enjoy the mysteries that she's trying to solve, but I more enjoy like learning about MAISIE and her personal life, and like just rooting for her and her friends and her family. And so I'm like fully invested at this point, as you can tell, because I'm on number 14. I also read Look Closer. This is a domestic thriller that was so much fun to read. It follows a couple named Simon and Vicky. They have been married for years. They seem to really care about each other, but they also seem to be lying to each other left, right, and center through this book. we stumble upon the death and murder of a young socialite who has been brutally murdered on Halloween night. And somehow Simon and Vicky get enraptured into the death of this person. Maybe somebody's involved with the death. You have to read to find out. This was like twisty-turny, and you go from the different people's vantage points. So you read from Simon, then you read from Vicky, so on and so forth. And I really liked it. I didn't know where it was going, and I was just along for the ride. And I'll definitely read more by David Ellis. I think he's written like a series of detective books. Have any of you read that? Because I'm kind of interested after reading this and enjoying it. So very open-minded about that. Next up is a nonfiction book that I finished like just in time. I finished it on April 30th. So this is How to Fail by Elizabeth Day. I really liked this. This was hilarious, but also really vulnerable and honest. And this is about Elizabeth's life, and she created a whole podcast called How to Fail, and she interviews celebrities and just very well-known people who talk about the failing points in their lives, however that looks for them. And in this book, she turns it basically on herself and speaks about her own failures in life. So she speaks to all sorts of things: failing at fitting in, failing at marriage, failing at work. She speaks also about her experience with infertility and experiencing miscarriage. She had a miscarriage, and I was just like glued to that section because, as many of you know, I also had a miscarriage. She speaks about the IVF process and going through that and not being successful with it, failing at it. And I just felt like this is such a great book to read if you're just going through life, just living. I feel like everyone seems to put their most positive, I'm doing amazing selves out there for the world. We have so many like how to do this, how to do that. On TikTok, everyone seems to think they're an expert at everything, and I'm gobbling it up just as much as everyone else is. But I love some vulnerability. I love vulnerability, and I just felt like I wanted to give Elizabeth Day a hug, just to say me too, and also thank you. It's just a book I won't forget. She also wrote a book recently about friendship that I really want to read, because at the core of this book, there's so much about friendship and how they've lifted her up through just the worst moments of her life. And I don't know about you, but I am so lucky to have really wonderful women and friends in my life. And I want to read that book. So that was How to Fail. Definitely going to read more by her. She also writes fiction, and I've read one of them and really liked it, so I might have to pick up more of her fiction as well. Oh my goodness, 2 more books to go. The next is a book called My Husband, and this follows a woman who is completely obsessed with her husband. It's almost like, I don't know, I've read a lot of books about stalkers, but I've never thought about stalkers and their own lives minus the stalking. Like, what would happen if a stalker got married to the person they were stalking? And that's what it feels like reading this book. You follow a woman who is completely in tune with everything her husband says, everything he does, and everything to her has meaning. So for example, she gets together with some friends, like couple friends. They have a little couple date. They're playing a game that's about like, what kind of fruit are you? I don't know why this is part of the game, but it's part of the game. And her husband says that she is like Clementine. And she is so upset and insulted that she's like, how am I going to you know, punish him for thinking of me as a clementine, and that's grocery store fruit, and why wouldn't I be a dragon fruit or something more different? And then there are random things like she really likes to sleep with the blinds open, and her husband has said that he can't sleep that way. So she has spent years and years and years sleeping with the blinds closed. And one day she opens the blinds and he's able to sleep through it in the middle of the night. And she's like, why has he been lying to me about not being able to sleep with the blinds open? It is unhinged. It's unhinged. And I was disturbed the entire way through. And the ending, I listened to this on audio. The ending, I actually went, oh! You're not going to guess the ending. You will not guess the ending. Mind blown. Absolutely fantastic. It's translated fiction. And I'm here for anything else she writes. 100%. I'll read it all. I really thought that would be my favorite book from the month, but then I remembered reading Nestlings by Nat Cassidy. Wow. This man can really get into the mind of a woman. And I feel like he's such a feminist author because he really explores feminist issues and just female issues. I read Mary by him, and that explores women of a certain age who are going through menopause and aren't really looked at anymore. And then in this book, Nestlings, it explores what happens to women after they have a child. And this book follows a couple, Anna and Reed. They are struggling. They live in New York. They had a very difficult childbirth. I should say Anna had a difficult childbirth. Things went wrong and she is now paralyzed from the waist down. And they just need a win. They need a win in their lives. They adore this child, but they're also really struggling financially and just in every way, shape, or form. Luckily for them, they had put their names into like a kind of lottery, apartment lottery system. And this stunning building in New York City has reached out to them and said, hey, if you're still interested, we can have you here and we would love to have you live with us and take an apartment on it. The rent is good. And so they say yes, and they move quite suddenly into this apartment building. They really, really like it until they feel like things are going wrong with their baby. They find like, it looks like bite marks on the baby's neck. And they're like, that's impossible. They live high up in the building and it's just like, that doesn't make any sense. Essentially, there are vampires in this building. And it seems that the reason that they got the lottery and they were drawn was because they just had a baby. I have never read, okay, the only other vampire book that I have read that I felt this creeped out by is probably the Southern Book Club's Guide for Slaying Vampires. And both of these books do have a lot of humor in them alongside the vampire stuff. I think this book is scarier though than that one. There are images in this book that I will not get out of my head. It was disturbing beyond belief. And also fun beyond belief as well. I loved every single second of reading this. I felt like I was there. I felt like I was in New York. Like I just felt like I was there. I just loved it. Please go and read this. I definitely preferred Nestlings over Mary, even though I loved Mary as well. But there's something about this book that unsettled me in a way that Mary didn't quite get that disturbing for me. And you know, I'm here for the scaries and the scary things in life. So those are all of the books that I read in April. Please let me know what your favorite book from April was. I'd love to know, and I will talk with you soon. Bye, guys.